Hello, right-footed family. Welcome back. Recently, I was scrolling through my Facebook feed and came across the post of one of the girls I mentor who was also born without arms like me. She was gushing about having a crush on a boy at her school. It reminded me of when I was her age and how it felt to be a young woman yearning to be in a loving relationship. When I was a teenager, I used to wonder about my future in the romance department, just like everyone else. I was a late bloomer in the dating arena. My insecurity stemmed not from my not having arms, but from the way society made me feel different. I am grateful for giving myself more time before dating, though. It gave me more time to build confidence. When I started to seek out serious relationships, I hoped to find someone who loved me for being me, not because I could do cool things with my feet or because they pitied me. Patrick, my former Taekwondo instructor and now my husband, fit perfectly in that mold from the day we first met. He didn't even realize I didn't have arms at first. As he tells it, he just saw a new girl with a pretty face walk into the room. It was only after Patrick started traveling with me on speaking tours that I realized how some people viewed our marriage as something special, specifically because of my disability. In places like Africa, people would look at me with mouths agape after I introduced my husband. They seemed shocked that a man without disabilities, or perhaps any man at all, might choose to be with me. On one trip to Ghana, a man came up to Patrick and said, "Thank you for loving Jessica," as if he deserved a humanitarian award for marrying me. While I know that in his heart that person meant well, the comment was both upsetting and very telling. I wanted to ask, why wouldn't he love me? Why should anyone's disability keep them from being loved? The comment also revealed the quiet, unspoken prejudice that people with disabilities face, that belief that the differently able do not or should not partake in sexual relationships. This is a natural corollary to the worldview that people with disabilities cannot be fully functioning members of society. In many developing countries, where oftentimes children with disabilities are kept hidden at home out of shame, how can people with disabilities be viewed as capable of forming loving sexual relationships? This societal prejudice has some serious consequences. Because people with disabilities are viewed as asexual, they are often denied access to basic sexual education and reproductive health care. In many countries, people with disabilities lack access to information about family planning and disease prevention, the testing and treatment of HIV and other STDs, and care during pregnancy and delivery. This gives rise to higher incidences of sexually transmitted infections and sexual abuse. People with disabilities, especially women and children, are much more vulnerable to sexual violence than other groups. According to data published in the Lancet Journal in 2012, the prevalence of violence against persons with disabilities is 1.3 times higher than that in the general population. Children with disabilities are 3.7 times more likely to be victims of violence than other children. This is due in part to people with disabilities' difficulty in accessing violence prevention information and services, their physical or intellectual vulnerability, and their perceived lower value by society. The abuse of a person with a disability may be more easily dismissed, ignored, or unseen. When I was in Ethiopia, I'd heard the story of a woman who was born deaf and had never been given any sexual education. She was married to a deaf man who died after suffering from a long illness. No one in her community knew sign language, so she was unable to learn what had happened to her husband. Then she became very ill, and despite several trips to the hospital, she did not know what was wrong with her. Eventually, a Handicap International health volunteer, who was also deaf, found her and brought her to a clinic that partners with the organization. There she consulted with staff members trained to work with people with different types of disabilities and was given an HIV test. It came back positive. Clinic workers explained her diagnosis to her and options for treatment. Although saddened to know she had HIV, she was relieved to finally have answers and know that her health would improve once she started taking the right medication. When I talk to the young women I mentor, I give them the same advice that I would give any other woman. Cultivate your passions, be confident in your uniqueness, keep high standards, and never settle for anything less than love and respect. I have another challenge for you. I take my feet for granted just like you take your hands for granted. So, this week, I'd like to see you take a selfie with your feet. Post some proof down in the comments, and I'll share my favorites on my Facebook page. I would love to hear your feedback, questions, and episode ideas down below. If you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use a little motivation. After all, if I can fly an airplane without arms, what is it that you can do?